This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Another episode of Saving the Last Dance as we do our post-wrap-up discussion of the docuseries Michael Jordan's The Last Dance. And as always, let me go ahead and introduce my man. You already see him, styling and profiling, repping the Baseline NBA podcast t-shirt. Lovely. I say suspended, Mr. Warren Shaw in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, brother?
I'm doing good, family. As always, The Last Dance, bringing me all the joy on a Sunday night. We come together as an NBA basketball family. We watch these episodes, and we just have a great time. And, hey, I think our episodes after The Last Dance, Saving the Last Dance, are doing great, man. So happy to be with you here for episodes 5 and 6.
Absolutely. It's just giving us all the feels.
You know it.
All the feels. All right. So listen, this was a really, really interesting set of episodes that highlighted some really important points. And Sean and myself are going to get into it. But as always, we want to make sure we put in the proper plugs. If people don't know who we are, I am Game Face Lee. That's my man, Warren Shaw. We represent the Baseline NBA podcast. Our show is a weekly podcast that discusses the hot button topics of the NBA. And as always, be sure to get at my man Shaw on his Twitter handle at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. And we always encourage comments, thoughts, perspective. That's what we like to do. We like to provoke conversation, and we love featuring it anytime the opportunities presents itself. So be sure to look for us. If you've never heard of the show, you will now. But more importantly, we always expect our listeners, new or old, to definitely give us feedback. Let us know, what's good with what we give you as far as content goes. So our discussion this week regarding Jordan and the docuseries, which has just been, fabulous. There's some really important points that we definitely want to cover. We're going to be talking about Jordan's brand, which was highlighted quite often. The ups, the downs, so many different angles that can be discussed with regards to his brand. We're also going to talk about his legacy. I think that's something that was very focused in highlighting when it became somewhat tarnished, and even Jordan's perspective on it. I know Shaw has some really good thoughts in regards to that. And now, of course, we got to talk about the Dream Team because the savagery that went on with regards to Jordan's Dream Team. And let's just be real about this. This docuseries made this a point about this being Jordan's Dream Team was made evidently clear. And so we're definitely going to get into that. And plus a couple other tidbits, of course. And there is a snitch list. My man Shaw, he knows what I'm talking about. We started this on the first episode. There is a Jordan snitch list, and we'll get into that. All right, so first things first, Shaw, let's talk about the Jordan brand. And I got to tell you, I didn't realize that back in 1998 when Michael Jordan, after the All-Star game, I know you're going to talk a little bit about the All-Star game itself, but I didn't realize it after the All-Star game when the Knicks, when the Bulls went to go play the Knicks at Madison Square Garden, where he perceived that this was going to be his final appearance as a Chicago Bull at the Madison Square Garden, that he elected to wear his original Air Jordans. And you talk about branding. I mean, that's about as good as it gets. I wish if I had known that in a marketing or a business class that they were going to talk about branding recognition, man-made branding recognition 101. You wouldn't, if this didn't become the perfect example for that. I don't know. I would just completely get out of business as an elected, something for my degree, and just basically get into shoemaking.
Well, I mean, he did it on the biggest stage. I mean, he says in the documentary there that he loved playing in New York, more than anything else, and he wanted to make sure he gave them a show. And then he had the ability, in essence, to wear his original Air Jordans. And I think even the story of that, how they got into that early into the docuseries, I think is episode 5, where with David Falk, and talking about when initially they were trying to get him a deal. Falk knew that this guy was going to be it and wanted to make sure that other brands knew that. Converse had that super cheesy ad. They had Bird and Magic, and everybody already inked. Jordan wanted to be an Adidas athlete, but they weren't really well established at the time and didn't know any better. And then, hey, his mom and dad had to force him to take a meeting with Nike. And it's just crazy.
They said, you need to get your ass on that plane.
Act right and, man up and at least take the meeting and hear what they have to say. And now, whatever it is, 40-something years later.
And something real quick, Shaw, something real quick that was crazy to me. Falk had said, yeah, we're going to fly you to Nike onto their campus. So, I don't know what where like Adidas was at that particular time. I certainly didn't know where Converse was, but Nike had a campus already. You know what I'm saying? For, as far as looking to profile an athlete for their brand. And what did they pay? I think they paid out like $250,000 was his initial deal with them. Yeah. And then they said they said the goal was to try to make at least 120 mil within the first couple of years. Right? And they had already eclipsed that in the first year with Jordan.
Yeah. And I think we have to kind of maybe run those numbers again. I'm not quite sure exactly because I thought it was $3 million they wanted to make in the first year, and they made 100.
Yeah, 300. I'm sorry. It was 300, but they did 120 in the first year.
Yeah, and so they did extremely well with that, and then just not knowing that he would take off in the way that he did. As you alluded to, $250K was like stupid money. It's still stupid money to me now, but stupid money then to just give a guy who basically hadn't really done anything yet, quote unquote, in the league. And some people thought Nike was crazy, but look where they are now as a result and how much that has paid off. And, fast forwarding all the way back to your original point with the game in Madison Square Garden when he kind of knew it was it. He's even shit talking his own shoes. Like, oh, innovation has changed a lot since then. And, 1984 or whatever it was in 1998, just kind of laughing at where his shoe was to where it was then, and how much more comfortable. And he goes out there and blitzes the Knicks for how many points, and his feet are literally bleeding at the end of it. So as we all know now, Jordan shoes aren't meant to play ball in. They are more of a fashion statement. But it's just crazy to know how that all came about. And, shout out to David Falk, who was a titan in the sports agency scene way back then and well into the 90s, especially with Michael Jordan as his lead client.
Well, let me push back slightly on this before we move on to our next point. I think that those shoes, I think Jordan, again, brand recognition, wanted to make a statement about what he created in this period, in this time frame, wearing those Jordans. But you look at how Michael Jordan, how his game has evolved and the way that he was playing the game. There is no way that he could be able to do that playing in those Jordans that he was wearing. And I think that to me is part of the point that I wanted to make sure is put out there. Not only did Michael Jordan elevate the perceived notion that it was a fashion statement, he also elevated the way that even brands had to craft whatever product that an athlete is going out there to play, to produce, to do whatever for you, to do it effectively. I mean, look at what happened with Zion Williamson with Duke, right? The guy basically runs a hole in a Nike sneaker, and then the very next day, everybody's talking about, is Nike going to be able to sign Zion Williamson? Is there any shoe that Zion Williamson can wear under the Nike brand that he won't bust a hole through because the guy is just a physical freak or whatever the case may be? But it highlights the idea that Nike's commitment is, yeah, we're going to funnel out a ton of money to put you under our label, but we obviously need to make sure that whatever shoe we craft doesn't make us look like what you did as a college kid on the pro level, So that was one thing I wanted to make sure I highlight, in the sense that I think Michael Jordan was just making a statement that it didn't matter if it was his 84s or if his 98s. He's going to come in there. And he even said it. He's like, he told the Knicks, he's like, man, I had to go back to 84 to whoop y'all ass. And I just thought about it. I was just like, that is the type of person Michael Jordan was. And even if he had to come off the court with bleeding feet, he was going to do it knowing that he beat his rivals, his rival team, which at that time frame, in the late 90s, was the New York Knicks.
Yeah, and I think just incredible loyalty to the brand. You'll see that as well too when we get into the Dream Team stuff and how he didn't want to wear, the Reebok and all that stuff like that too. But I think even moving past the sneakers, obviously they talk about the iconic Gatorade commercial, "Be Like Mike," and Gatorade, to their credit, has redone or remastered that commercial in the midst of the pandemic with Elena Delle Donne, Zion Williamson, and Jason Tatum making appearances in that as well too. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the great commercials with Spike Lee, and Mars Blackman. Jordan's making an appearance and Do the Right Thing, for our younger fans may not even be aware of what that movie did for the culture back then, but just amazing stuff, and all related to MJ and how he wanted to make sure that his brand was always well known, but how people latched onto it as well. I don't think you could do something like that and know that it's gonna take off in the way that it did. And we'll get into that obviously at some point about his fame and how it even ultimately impacted him. But he was truly a victim of his own success in a lot of ways. And that'll lead me into my next point when talking about his brand. A lot of people still to this day don't appreciate him for not being able to speak out on public issues in the way that you see guys like LeBron James and Carmelo and Chris Paul and Dwayne Wade speak out in now. Talk a little bit about your perspective when they talked about the Harvey Gantt situation and how Jordan, his infamous quote, "Republicans buy shoes too," whether it was made in jest or not, how that kind of, in essence, blew out of proportion, but was it right? Because he should have taken a stance, and he's kind of unapologetic in a lot of ways, but at the same time, he remains understanding that, hey, he was a little bit selfish in that same moment.
Yeah, so if people had followed the docuseries, at that time, Harvey Gantt is a Democrat, liberal Democrat, who is running for the Senate seat in North Carolina. And Jesse Helms, who, if people know a little bit about their history, knows that Jesse Helms is a segregationist, a racist.
He's a mother effer.
Yeah. He's just not. He's not somebody that I would think that you would want to have representing your state. But let's keep this in perspective. Michael Jordan was a far greater figure for North Carolina than Jesse Helms was. But yet, the good old folks in North Carolina still deemed it fit that Jesse Helms is a better representation of their state at that particular time frame.
Yeah.
So when the opportunity presented itself where there could have been change, where there could have been a shift in the narrative of Black representation, even in southern states, I'm not going to go on a limb and say, Michael Jordan, did us dirty or anything like that. It's not about that. I think if Michael Jordan elected to just not say anything, that'd have been fine. And this isn't even about his brand, Shaw. This is really about recognition of who you are. And Jordan had mentioned that. And I sincerely believe that he still was trying to figure out his place with the brand that he had built. And remember, LeBron James did the same thing, okay? I'm not trying to make comparisons. I'm saying every athlete, when given a star status platform, will always have to answer that question within themselves. When is the right time for them to step into a space that they're not going to be comfortable with, they're not going to be accustomed to? And when can they see themselves coming out of that space, still managing to keep their image, their brand, for the sake of doing the common good, doing the good for the public people? And this was something that Jordan has always struggled with. Jordan has never been the type of person, and I don't know why people feel the need to always have to bring that to such a light, but only because of the fact that he is widely known, the most successful Black athlete and everything like that, and I get that. But where he messed up is when he made the comment, even Republicans buy my shoes. And to me, you have put yourself in that space by doing that. All you had to say was, this is not my thing. I just want to make sure that I go out and I play the game that I was meant to play, and that I want nothing but the best for the people in North Carolina, whoever wins. But the moment that you start putting certain words into a space, people attach you with that word, that phrase, that thought, and that was his first knock, so to speak, on his brand. And it was justified because I think Jordan had an out but didn't know how to get himself out of it. And I think he learned his lesson from that. In a way, it actually scared him away from being involved in the politics of where his brand may be tarnished. And we didn't really see him step into doing anything like that until after he walked away from the game.
Right. And I think, 15 minutes in here, as we discussed this, he always had to be on, right? He always had to be on. And I think in this aspects where he was trying to protect himself and didn't realize the insensitivity that might and how that could be taken to people who needed and maybe thought he should speak out. And I think LeBron, going back to that a little bit, struggled with that early on as well. He didn't always want to. And you had figures, especially in Jordan's day, like Jim Brown, very, very strong, demonstrative, Black guys who wanted to make sure that, hey, their voices were heard and people needed to stand out. And I think, I forget who it was comparing Jordan to Muhammad Ali and things of that nature. And everybody has their own, I guess, crosses to bear and things that they're willing to fight for. And Jordan just wasn't really willing to do that in that time. But kind of closing out his brand, so to speak, one thing that definitely hurt his brand, along with the gambling and things of that nature, was a Jordan Rules book. Sam Smith, a guy who we actually had on our show not too long ago when he did something with Derrick Rose, that came out, and that really in some ways hurt that Bulls team that year. And especially Mike himself, who was tired of defending the way he handled his business and the way that he was just dealing with teammates and the whole nine. And just what are your thoughts when you saw that? Do you remember when that book came out, and kind of the controversy that surrounded Mike and the Bulls around that time?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember when that book came out, and I felt like I'm talking about it now in retrospect. This book really highlighted such a disparity about how the media was treating Michael Jordan, along with how Michael Jordan was treating everybody else. And it's interesting because sometimes somebody in that scrum has to write the kind of story that may even sacrifice his well-being. You remember, Sam Smith had even indicated that he was receiving a ton of backlash once the book had been released, so much so that he had to basically be, lay low for a week.
Yeah.
He wasn't, he couldn't go in and do his normal thing, which is be a reporter and talk about the Chicago Bulls after writing that particular book. And sometimes that's the sacrifice that you make, whatever the motivations were for writing the book. Anyone who's writing a book, you don't just write a book because you're only trying to tell a story. You write a book because you want people to read, and you want people to pay to read that particular story because it's with insight and introspect that you would never get anywhere else. Not even the immediate media frenzy would be able to get access to. You have access to that, and you want to put that in the public light. So by doing that, he sacrificed for the greater good of that. But in essence, I think in its totality, let me say it like this. In its totality, I think what this did is it also uncovered a lot of the untold truths about athletes, superstar athletes in the NBA space, because at that time, Stern had the NBA looking really pristine. So when your top player is basically being put out there as, being a narcissistic control freak who's, like he's got a gambling problem and this, that, and the third. I mean, when you're putting all of that in a certain space, in a certain bubble to give people reason to ask questions, not only are you asking questions about Michael Jordan, you're now asking questions about Magic Johnson. You're now asking questions about Charles Barkley. You're asking questions about every perceivable superstar. And at that time, Black athletes as superstars, are they on their best behavior, or are they sweeping it under the rug because they're now making a ton of money and making a business in sport look good?
Yeah, and I think it's always about that. It's interesting, when you talk about Stern, there's some stuff that happens with Stern there, especially when you talk about his overall legacy, Jordan's legacy, and then when the gambling problems or perceived problems started to come into play, and Stern's like, well, I mean, it's Michael Jordan, and, $10,000 to him is like $10 to us. So, blah, 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 and kind of turning a blind eye in that, and I think all those things kind of blended into his overall persona and things that he had to manage on a regular basis. One of the interesting things I found in this docuseries, I believe it was in episode 6 specifically, and when you see the stuff starts to wear on him, but it's like to be like Mike is really, it's a full-time job. Like the minute he leaves his hotel room, he's got to be on. And conversations about, not conversations, but the actions he took outside of stuff where he wasn't always looking for the attention, talking to terminally ill children, like before each and every game, like that's stuff you hear a lot about with Mike in general. But parts of this series got to start to show you where he's just tired. He's just tired of being so famous. And I think it was Mark Spears who tweeted out, even as the show was going on, it's like, and now you know why he's basically a friggin' recluse now. Like, he doesn't come out, he doesn't do appearances, because all that, all the way, again, and we'll touch on Dream Team, obviously, but all that is just like, it's so much. You think you want that level of popularity and notoriety, and you don't. You don't. And go ahead.
Can I quickly throw something in here? This is the reason why I think people have touted Greg Popovich as one of the greatest coaches of all time, because, and we'll talk about this at some other point, hopefully on another different show, because we can talk about the San Antonio Spurs. But you can make the argument that Greg Popovich did his very best to protect Tim Duncan, because while Tim Duncan was quiet, Tim Duncan was a superstar. He was a superstar in a small market. He elevated the importance of being a player in a small market, that a player can make a small market a big market, for San Antonio. He was part of a dynasty there. And if you look at the way that Tim Duncan has lived his life, I don't think that just happens in this little, Duncan was doing that even when he was in Wake Forest. I don't think it was like that. I think a lot of that comes down to Greg Popovich, the relationship that he has with Greg Popovich, and Greg Popovich's ability to funnel out anything that's going to deter from the ability to make sure that his players are feeling comfortable in their own skin, to not just perform on the court, but also to be mentally ready off the court. Because now you see what happens when greatness absolutely consumes you, like that. That's what it was for Jordan. And we don't find out about this until some 20 years after the fact.
Very true. Very true. So continuing on with the legacy, I want to get your take here, man, on kind of 3 different situations in which Jordan had to overcome some semblance of obstacle, whether they were real or fabricated, I think in some aspects. Comparing the series with Portland, and the Clyde Drexler comparisons, where some people thought Clyde was as good, as Mike, versus that tough series with the Knicks in '93, how they came back from 0-2, the infamous Charles Smith game in Game 5, John Starks dunked the whole 9, and versus the ultimate, the finals, the NBA Finals that year against the Phoenix Suns, and the fabricated beef he had with Dan Marley just because he heard Jerry Krause had kind of liked Marley and thought he was a good defender, and then ultimately have to beat one of his good friends, Charles Barkley. Which one of those 3 series or, introspects, if you will, from the docuseries was most compelling to you?
Okay, so Bulls versus Blazers, I just call that the GOAT. Okay, that's just the GOAT. That's just Jordan taking things to another level. He knew what he wanted to do, what he had to do, and he basically put his footprint that he is the most dominant player, not just within that 3-year stretch, but you can make the argument that he was a dominant player of the decade. We didn't even get to the end of the end of 1990s, and we had already pretty much cemented him GOAT. Bulls versus Knicks, GOATness. Okay, I call that GOATness. When the Knicks are trying to basically be the Detroit Pistons of the Chicago Bulls, and Michael Jordan figures out a way to elevate the Bulls to a level that the Knicks could never, even when they wanted to be like the Pistons, they could never be like the Pistons. And you can make the argument that, while the Pistons may have had 2 titles, right, they were lucky because they may have only had 1 title when the Bulls had pushed them to 7 games. And we had talked about that in our previous episode. And then the whole situation with the Phoenix Suns, I just call it GOATed. He was GOATed. You know what I'm saying? Because now that we understand the magnitude of what happened with Jordan and the relentlessness and the knocks that he's taking and his brand and, and everything that he's accomplished up to this particular point, this was something that I was actually going to pose as a question to you at some point, Shaw, was, do you think that Jordan's greatness was him manufacturing all of this stuff that's happening, or was it truly in relation to the era of which he was playing when he was winning these titles? And I think you can make the argument that you're getting a little bit of both. Yeah. I think that he had to manufacture some of it, but in the middle of all of that, he was playing in a great era of great basketball players, and at the end of every single marker, he was always on top.
Yeah, I mean, he's like the epitome of, like, what'd you say? And you might not have said anything. He's going to think or make you think that you even said something or you even looked at him wrong. It's like, okay, well, that's a reason now for us to kind of take it out on you. And I think there was a great story on Players Tribune that I had read, I think sometime last week, right after the, I think 3 and 4 had came out. And Gary Payton had talked about, hey, he's coming in there. I think his first or second year in the league. And Mike is just kind of sitting on it as a preseason game. And Payton is just giving the Bulls work. Mike didn't really play a whole lot. And he's talking all kinds of stuff. He's lighting them up. Regular season comes on, and Jordan lights him up for like 30-something, right? And he's just like, he gives GP the business. And then at the end of the game, he walks up to Payton's bull face and got Payton in foul trouble and everything, and walked to him. Remember that issue was talking in preseason? That's Michael Jordan. It's like he's always marking the ledger, even if there's nothing to be marked. Gary Payton wasn't talking crap to MJ specifically in that preseason game, but he was talking to his dudes and talking to his boys, and that was something to motivate Mike for the next purpose. And that's just who he was consistently, always looking for something to give him that competitive edge. And then speaking about that, hey, that's what he says. I have a competition problem. He's flipping quarters with security guards. He's going to Atlantic City in the midst of playoff series and things of that nature. And that ultimately ended up forcing him to not want to talk to the media in a while when people started to basically tear him down off of that pedestal. And that, in some ways, was tarnishing his legacy, but that's, in essence, what made him more tired. And that's really what I got out of I think, these 2 episodes this week, was the fame ultimately just drained him in general, no matter how good he was, no matter how much he fabricated the energy in some ways to get to that next level and to push through. That stuff just started to wear on him ultimately. And that's what ultimately led him to definitely his first retirement for sure. And then, we see what ends up happening, obviously, in the second retirement with just the relationship being strained with Jerry Krause.
Final thought before we talk about the Dream Team, because I know you cannot wait to talk about that. But to your point, I think with Jordan, because and I think in a way you can make the argument that some of it was unnecessary, right? Some of it was a little unnecessary because of how the media had to cover him. Some of it certainly was basically being built, because now at this point, we're trying to find some kind of legitimate foil for Michael Jordan. His greatness has totally consumed the NBA, right? Like, you're just expecting him to win 10 championships in a row because he's just that great, right? Like, we've never seen anything like this before. And some of it was, manufactured on, his own from the game perspective. But I do think that in a way, Shaw, some of it was self-inflicted off the court with the way that he attacked or the way that he approached himself with just the leisurely things. Like, he couldn't play a game of golf without betting, right? Without putting money on every hole that he played. He couldn't go and play cards just for the sake of playing cards. He had to go to Atlantic City with his dad and gamble. You know what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't – like, if I want to get away with, like, if I'm playing a championship series or something like that, and I'm, like, really stressed out with my pops, I'm like, yo, Dad, let's go take a trip to Jamaica, you know what I'm saying, and go hang out, you know what I'm saying, but Dun Rivers Falls or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is something relaxing. I don't see myself running down to a casino mill and just shelling out money, you know what I'm saying, just to say that was therapeutic for me. Well, you know what I'm saying?
And I think for him,
but that's embedded in him. That's
right.
How he wants to do things.
And that's what it boils down to. The same things that make him great are the things that make him flawed at the same time.
Exactly.
Right? Fully. So jumping into the Dream Team, obviously, the 1992, they start off that conversation with.
Let's be clear. This docuseries is not talking about the Barcelona Dream Team. or the USA dream. This is Jordan's dream team. Okay.
Yeah.
This is Jordan's dream team.
The great PR.
Because even Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, they all conceded and say, yeah, that was his team.
And so, the PR representative, Ryan McIntyre, for many years, just great individual. And I think he has one of the greatest quotes in there. He's like, Michael Jordan was the alpha, period. Like there was no other. And then I think Magic and Chuck, they all got a taste of it in one of those practices where they kind of goading at him and going after him. And then like Mike turned it on like a switch. That great soliloquy, if you will, and conversation about how MJ was like, all right, enough of this. Let me show you what's what. What was very important. And then even how they still, like, they're in friggin' Barcelona and they continue to carry their beef with Jerry Krause into this situation now, as a result of Krause wooing Tony Kukoc and Pippen not necessarily being taken care of. And Mike and Scotty go to the rest of the team like, oh, he's ours, like especially that first matchup. And they put the clamps on Tony for no other reason other than the fact that he was perceived to be one of Jerry's guys. Like Kukoc had no idea. You see in the documentary, he still has no idea why they came at him so hard. And to his credit, he came back and acquitted himself pretty well in the championship game, which they still got blown out. But he played well. But that first matchup, it was like a deer in headlights. And Scotty and Mike, they ate him for lunch.
Yeah, so if you notice, Tony Kukoc, it's probably like, what the hell did I do, y'all? You know what I'm saying? He's like, did y'all forget? I was a part of a team that won a championship with you guys. But again, Shaw, it lends to that Jordan dynamic. Jordan, he had his peoples. You know what I'm saying? He had his guys that he leaned on. And if he didn't care for you, he just didn't care for you. You know what I'm saying? And, you're just collateral damage, 100%. In this situation. Yeah. And I feel like this is part and parcel when, the game obviously has evolved in such a way now that things like this would be exposed very quickly. And I don't know, maybe there are rules, there's now maybe a quiet code of ethics that, players may have. But back then, ain't nobody saying nothing to Jordan, hey, man, you back off a little bit or whatever. Jordan is like, nah, man, you blame Krause. Krause opened his mouth and put that boy's name out in our space. And Jordan made that known. And it's just, it's funny to me because while Scottie Pippen was obviously in the late 90s now, you see him kind of getting his own voice and doing his own thing. Oh, he was riding along with Michael Jordan easy in 92. He's like, hey, man, I'm with you. I don't want this boy coming out of, wherever he's coming from and disrespecting my space. You know what I'm saying? Whether Slovakia, Yugoslavia, whatever. Even the words that Pippen was trying to be very diplomatic, he came off disrespectful. You know what I'm saying? And so they could not get away from the idea that they certainly saw Jerry Krause's face every time Tony Kukoc was on the floor playing that game. It just is what it was. So
for sure, and I think in closing out the Dream Team stuff, it was interesting to just know that solidified his brand even more. Going on that global stage, and then just seeing the attention he got out there.
That one clip where he walked outside of the hotel and then looks up and he sees himself, on that banner on a very quiet street, unassuming, but yeah. He realizes now that he's larger than life. And I thought that there was, I know we got a couple more things, but to me, there was some really great cinematic moments that quietly helped tell this story that was being told or narrated through all of the different interviews. But some of the pictures that we saw in these two episodes, I think spoke a lot more than just what we were seeing happen from the first 4 episodes, because the first 4 episodes had to be told by the players and the coaches and the people that were involved in the storytelling about what was going on leading up to this point.
Absolutely. So again, great episodes, I think, this week. The one thing I want to say, maybe kind of in closing out for sure, is, be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about, and they didn't do that much about it. It was kind of a tease, I think, with them talking about all the Kobe conversations that we're expected to see in this week's episodes. But it was a brief part. I really feel like it was the first 5 to 7 minutes of the first episode that we saw.
About as brief as everybody really wanting to find out what happened with Isaiah Thomas and the Dream Team. Yeah.
Right. You know, but I mean, just, you know, the ish he talked, you know, that Lakers boy over there, he just want to go. We just want to go over everybody. I think there's a real cute kind of poignant moment too for Grant Hill. He's like, well, I don't want to jump with him. I don't want to get caught. You know, and just like little things like that when you hear like the OGs talking about Kobe and even Kobe, and I think Kobe had an amazing quote in it as well too. You know, he's like, all the stuff that you see from you see me get, it's because of him. So, you know, he was never trying to entertain, was he better than Mike type of conversation. He knew that Mike was his mentor, and he got his game and patented after him, and he didn't hide that. And I think that was a great thing I think for anybody who had not seen that part of Kobe or that side of Kobe previous to that, maybe they can put some of that stuff to rest, that there was no debate between them. Those two were colleagues, and Jordan essentially was willing to pass the torch over to him.
Yeah. Final thought here, Shaw. Snitch list. We gotta get a snitch list, man. So Michael Jordan chilling with. Okay, so there's two moments of the snitch list that happened in this week's episodes. The first one is clearly Michael Jordan snitching on Horace Grant.
He snitched on the snitch. That's the thing.
He snitched on the snitch. But Horace Grant said, "I didn't say anything," right? So like, hey, notice you didn't have the NBA cares. He wasn't wearing that when he was making those admissions, okay? But Michael Jordan snitching on the snitch. That's the first one. And then the second one is when he's sitting chilling in the locker room after they win the second championship with Scottie Pippen, and he cracks open a Miller Lite. And he's like, you got to turn the cameras off. We can't be showing Jordan drinking beer. Yeah, that don't fly with Air Jordan, right? And so then Jordan proceeds to start talking, and he starts snitching on his original team again. Listen, Jordan must really, really not like the team that he played for back in '84, like in '85. Like seriously, like I don't know what's wrong with him. I have no idea why he keeps hearkening back to all of the crap that those guys are doing that he didn't do it. You know what I'm saying? But Jordan needs to stop putting cases on people.
Yeah, he's got loose lips right now, but at the end of the day, he's the GOAT, and it doesn't matter. He feels like he's in essence untouchable. So what are those guys going to say or do to him now at this point is really, I think, is how he looks at it and how he views it. But it's just like, again, every week. So I cannot wait to see what we see next week. Who gets snitched on? Who does the snitching? You know, in episodes 7 and 8, brother. But as always, The Last Dance, providing all the jokes and the laughs.
Most definitely. Once again, everybody, we like to thank you and yours for hopping on board with us this week, saving The Last Dance. Once again, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. What did you guys think? We want to hear from you. We're always on that Twitter feed, so definitely shoot us your thoughts and let us know what you're feeling. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren, Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We'll catch up with you